longest juvenile prison sentences in history. Number 5. Connor Crowe. In 2020, Connor Crowe gunned down his sister and mother. He attempted to claim an intruder burst into his home and carried out the deaths, before he later pleaded guilty to the deaths in November 2022. The crimes puzzled law enforcement as they continued to search for a motive, with prosecutor Stephen Dragic admitting, "I don't think we'll really understand why." Prosecution let out the maximum penalty allowable by law, a 40-year sentence for each offense, which would be a total of 80 years. Although the judge handed down the maximum sentence of 80 years behind bars, Connor will be eligible for parole after 15 years. Number 4. Dexter Johnson. Dexter Johnson and 4 other teens carjacked and robbed Maria Appearce and her boyfriend Hundo while they sat in their car outside of Hugh's house. According to court records, Dexter and the others took the young couple to a secluded area where Dexter took advantage of Maria before he and another teen shot them both, ending their lives. The deaths were part of what Harris County prosecutors have described as a 25-day crime spree by Dexter and others that also included 3 other deaths. Dexter had been on death row since his conviction in 2007. He was to die in 2019, but he didn't due to his new legal team claiming he has an intellectual disability. His post-conviction lawyer had waited too long to argue that Johnson was exempt from execution due to his alleged disability, they said. An appeals court granted a stay so the judge can determine whether the convict met the revised diagnostic criteria for a person with diminished capacity. If he did qualify, the state would be violating Johnson's constitutional rights if they put him to death, his new team contended. Number 3. Bobby Bostic. On December 12, 1995, Bobby, age 16, along with 18-year-old Donald Hudson, robbed a group of people in Missouri and shortly thereafter robbed and briefly detained a woman in her car. The pair were caught later that day, and Donald was offered a plea deal and accepted 30 years in prison. 4 months later, Bobby was also offered a plea deal of 30 years in prison. He turned it down though on the advice of relatives and belief that the eventual sentence could not be worse than the terms of the plea deal. He instead elected to go to trial, later saying, "I knew I was guilty, but I always thought I had a better chance with the jury. As a 17-year-old, I wasn't thinking clearly." Now, Bobby was found guilty of 17 charges, including 8 of armed criminal action, 3 of robbery, and 1 of kidnapping. The judge, Evelyn Baker, ordered his charges to run consecutively, giving him 241 years in prison, with the possibility of parole at 112 years old. Part of Judge Baker's reasoning for the sentence's length was that Bobby showed no remorse at the time, though she later said she realized his attitude was actually adolescent bravado, and that he was a child trying to pretend he was really tough. Bobby was serving the longest sentence in Missouri given to a juvenile for non-homicide offenses. His case attracted considerable media attention in later years due to changing laws regarding life sentences for minors and the severity of his sentence. Judge Baker later said she regretted giving Bobby the sentence and actively supported his unsuccessful appeal to the Supreme Court of the United States in 2018, along with over 100 current and former judges, prosecutors, and law enforcement officers. But in 2021, a new law passed allowing Bobby to apply for parole. His application was approved and he was released on November 9th, 2022. Number 2. Aiden Fui. The body of Tristan Bailey was discovered on Mother's Day, May 9th, 2021, hours after the teenager was reported missing by her family. She had been stabbed over and over and over again. Aiden Fui was arrested on a first-degree murder charge in the death of Tristan. Aiden, at the time of the death, was a fellow student at Patriot Oaks and lived near Tristan. Aiden's girlfriend and other friends told investigators that he often talked about ending the lives of people and specifically said he planned to drag a random person into the woods and stab them. He entered his guilty plea in February 2023 at a hearing intended to get jury selection for his trial underway. He was charged as an adult, and during the sentencing, Circuit Judge R. Lee Smith said he took into account several factors when making his decision, including Aiden's age, the heightened level of premeditation, and that he was the sole participant who was not pressured by anyone to commit the devastating crime. He noted that Aiden was considered of average maturity by his peers and that he understood the consequences of his actions. Tristan suffered a painful and horrifying death from someone she trusted, and he was convicted of first-degree murder and was sentenced to life in prison. And coming in at number 1 is Elmer Wayne Henley Jr. Elmer Wayne Henley Jr. was a teenage accomplice of Dean Corll who abducted, took advantage of, and ended the lives of a minimum of 28 young men between 1970 and 1973 in Houston and Pasadena, Texas. In several instances, Dean forced his victims to either phone or write their parents with explanations for their absences in an effort to allay the parents' fears for their son's safety. They continued these crimes with Elmer supplying Dean with boys. Then one day, Elmer brought a girl to the house where they committed the crimes, and Dean didn't like that. Dean then tied up Elmer, his other accomplice, and a potential victim and was going to end their lives. Elmer was able to escape and shot Dean, which resulted in his death. Elmer then released the other teens, and they decided to call the police. In custody, Elmer was initially questioned about the death of Dean. He recounted the events of the previous evening and that morning, explaining that he had shot Dean in self-defense. Now, the statements given by the other teens corroborated his account, and the detective questioning Elmer believed he had indeed acted in self-defense. Elmer then told the police everything that happened with Dean and the boys, and he received 6 life sentences. A judge sentenced Elmer to serve each 99-year sentence consecutively, totaling 594 years.